Hello, folks. Welcome to Between Awesome and Disaster. This is your host, Will Carey. I appreciate you tuning in. If this is your first time checking out the show, thank you for being here. And if you've been listening for a while, I really appreciate the support. It really means a great deal to me that you continue to check out the show. I'm very, very excited to share this with you today. My guest on the show today is singer-songwriter Frank Turner. Some people might remember him from his band Million Dead. Most people know him as a solo singer-songwriter, acoustic performer. I've been a massive fan of Frank's for a number of years. Since I first, and I talk about this with him briefly in the interview, I first heard of him when I saw a YouTube clip of him playing a song called Long Live the Queen. And it really floored me with not just the instrumentation, because he is very much a punk rocker, who's filtered through this acoustic singer-songwriter kind of instrumentation, and it really grabbed me when I first heard it because I had never heard anybody play or write songs like that. And the song "Long Live the Queen," which you can find everywhere you get your music, is a very emotional and powerful, lyrically very powerful song, and it really grabbed me, and I instantly had to listen to the album that was on and get more of his stuff. And I've been following him for a number of years now, and when I saw he was coming to New York City, he's currently on his No Man's Land tour, and I reached out to his people, and I was able to get a little bit of time before his show in New York City that just happened at Town Hall to chat with him. And he only had about 15 minutes in his schedule, because I had spoken to his tour manager, his U.S. representation, and his record label, all very nice people. But so I was able to get in for a few. And talk to him for a few minutes, and I think we had a really lovely chat. You'll hear me very quickly. You'll hear at the beginning of the interview my nerves kind of percolating all over the place as I try to get into the groove that I typically do on the show, because I usually do longer interviews. So I was trying to ask the questions that I wanted to ask, and then also and then hear what Frank had to say, because he's someone who I've respected for and been a fan of for a very long time, and it was quite a rush to get to do this interview. So this isn't as long an interview as I usually do on this show, so I will include, since it's a music-themed episode and it's a music-themed week on the show, I will include after my interview with Frank a clip of a clip from my one-man storytelling show, Fighting My Wiring, which I haven't released anywhere else, so this will be the first time anyone outside of bookers and people in the New York storytelling community will have heard this story, and it's musically related as well. I'll tell you a little bit about it afterwards. But real quickly, let's get into this interview that I'm really excited to share with singer-songwriter Frank Turner. And thank you guys for checking this out, and let's go to my chat with Frank.
It's a funny thing about touring. Everybody thinks I'm the boss, and it might be sort of at a planning and conceptual level, but once the bus leaves the depot and we're on the road, I am not the boss.
Right, you're just part of it's like a whole production. And
well,
you're just a part of
our tour manager Tree, she is the boss, and what she says is law. Yeah. And I get up in the morning and I'm informed what I'm going to be doing with my day, and I do it, or else I get in trouble.
She was so very nice. The first thing I wanted to make sure I said to you was my fiance had surgery last month, and she was very fearful of the operation, and I introduced her to your music recently, and she said the song "Long Live the Queen" like gave her hope when she was going through all of that fear and anxiety.
Well, thank you.
So,
I'm sorry to hear that she had to have an operation and had fear and anxiety in her life. I hope she's doing well.
she's doing much better, and she credits you in your song. And
I think medical science can get a look in this credit list as well, but that's very sweet of her.
Well, definitely, because that song, like, there's that song. I saw you, I think, performing "Long Live the Queen" in a in-store, like a record store, like years ago, and it just instantly grabbed me. So I just really love that song.
Yeah, it's a song. I mean, it's a song that's very dear to me on lots of different levels. You know, it's about somebody I cared for very much, and it's a song that's taken me many places as well, which is a nice thing. And I think a thing that my friend Lex would have appreciated.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's a concept. The concept of dancing for people who can't dance for themselves is something that really resonates with me, and it really resonated with her as well.
One of the fun things with that song is that, like, so Lex was an old friend of mine who was a friend from my kind of punk and hardcore days. Who she passed away when my solo career was kind of starting to kind of pick up a little bit of steam, but really wasn't going anywhere, particularly at the time. And she was a cynic, should we say, or a skeptic at the very least of the whole thing of me playing acoustic guitar. And I think that she would be extremely tickled to know that my song for her was one of the things that kind of fueled that actually going somewhere. So rest in peace, Lex.
yeah, absolutely. And it just like something about your stuff just really like taps me in my heart and soul, which is what my favorite music does. So I'm very appreciative of the songs. I wanted to ask you. I've spent some time in England and in Scotland, and I looked up your hometown of Meonstoke. I was curious.
Meonstoke,
I was curious what life growing up there was like.
Well, okay. The first thing, I wouldn't call it a town. It's a village.
Sure.
It's the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's a tiny little village. I mean, the thing is, like, I grew up there. I was shipped off to boarding school by my parents on a scholarship pretty early on. So I spent my sort of holidays there. But I mean, it was it was not an experience I enjoyed very much, getting shipped off to boarding school, if I'm honest with you.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I mean, you know, one could probably sit here and try and draw lines between my experiences then and the fact that I took to touring quite naturally, that kind of sense of rootlessness. I'm not sure how much time I have to kind of indulge such armchair psychoanalysis, but I mean the other kind of motivating thing behind all of that was that, you know, my love from an early age was music, and particularly initially metal and then punk rock and hardcore. And believe me when I tell you, there was nobody else who liked any of that kind of music within 50 miles of where I grew up, you know? So I was like an awful lot of people in the UK, and I'm sure in this side of the Atlantic as well. You know, the prime example for me is the song "London Calling" by The Clash. I mean, that song spoke to me more than you could possibly imagine, because he says it right there, London calling to the faraway towns. And it was like, that's me. I'm here. I'm being called to. And like, I moved to Camden as fast as my little legs would carry me. I actually moved to London 45 minutes after my last school exam.
Oh, that's great.
I went home, picked up a bag of clothes, and then ran out the door. My mum was quite upset at the time, but it needed to be done.
You were just kind of like, I love you, but I have
places to be. I have punk shows to go to.
Oh, 100%. And is London where you first discovered like the DIY scene and like the hardcore scene?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of stumbled across metal, and then sort of, you know, Nirvana pointed me towards punk conceptually, because Kurt Cobain used that word a lot of the time. And then I'm of the age where Smash and Dookie were the two records that kind of blew everybody away. But I mean, I think, and again, I'm sure this was true over here as well, but there was a sort of there was a filtration process in the sense that, like, for every 10 kids who bought a copy of Smash or Dookie, one or maybe two of them might go and check out NoFX or Bad Religion.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And then of those two, one of them would then get on to Black Flag. You know what I mean? And that's there's no implied superiority in that, but that's just how it worked for me. Is like, I liked those records, and I found NoFX, and I loved those records, and then I found Social D, and I found, do you know what I mean? And you go further and further in. So, you know, punk rock was my obsession, but it was all very kind of academic for a long time. I didn't really know anybody else who was into it. I got into kind of like mail order catalogs and that kind of thing, the No Idea Records catalog, the Initial Records catalog, all that kind of thing. But it was in the kind of later 90s, about 97, I kind of went to, actually, funnily enough, it was an Agnostic Front show
Oh, really?
In London in 1997, and discovered that there was a hardcore scene in London. I was still at school at the time, but I used to bunk off and go up there on the evenings and weekends and stuff. And I found out there was Household Name Records, which is a London-based hardcore record label, and they put on shows, and there were London hardcore bands like Knuckle Dust and Special Move and Stamping Ground, and that became my life, you know. And the London hardcore in the late 90s was my absolute obsession at that period of my life.
Oh, 100%. Like that. I've talked to lots of people about punk rock, and there's always that sort of like epiphany kind of moment that comes with it. And what you were saying about the kind of the trickle down of it, like I always liken it to like, if Blink-182 for me was like a really sugary drink at Starbucks, Black Flag was me getting down to like single pour over espresso coffee.
Yeah, sure,
like just cutting, like I need the purest, most uncut.
Yeah, and then you get to Negative Approach and you're doing like AeroPress coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Just dropping drops of hot water over a single bean. Get really granular.
Yeah.
And when you were in the hardcore scene, and like when you were singing for A Million Dead, had you been playing guitar during that time, leading into your solo career?
I started. The guitar was my first instrument, and still the only one I'm even remotely competent at. But like, I mean, the very first bands I played in was like in a bedroom with my friends when I was like 11, and I played guitar then, and we played Nirvana and AC/DC covers, and a great time of it we had too, and we played 2 shows, one of which was my sister's birthday, and the other one was our bass player's birthday. And then I was in a band called Knee Jerk for a while. That was a kind of we were kind of obsessed with stuff like Refused and Cave In.
I listened to some of it. Yeah.
Oh wow. Yeah, back when I couldn't sing to save my life. It very much reminded me kind of Sunny Day Real Estate we had a bit of that kind of vibe going on too. I mean, it was a moment in history when emo and like hardcore were drifting towards each other, and we were part of that kind of general trend, I think. But Knee Jerk, we did a couple of UK tours. We never played outside the UK, but we probably played like maybe 50 shows, between 50 and 100 shows, I guess. That's actually the only band I've been in that I don't have a list of all the shows we played, and it annoys me greatly that I don't, because I have a list of every other show that I've done. And then Knee Jerk broke up, and then me and the drummer from Knee Jerk formed Million Dead. Well, actually, he formed Million Dead and then asked me to join. And then Million Dead was a transitional moment for me, because me and Ben were both from the hardcore scene. The other 2 people in the band were not, and they were very much more interested in kind of, let's say, mainstream rock.
Sure.
Let's say, you know, they wanted to be Queens of the Stone Age, and me and Ben wanted to be Refused.
Gotcha,
and I think that made for kind of an interesting mix for Million Dead as a band, actually. But that on a sort of career level, that meant that before Million Dead, I'd only ever really played DIY shows. In Million Dead, you know, we started like, we got support slots with bigger tours, and we played festivals and stuff like this, which I'd never done before, and then that was a kind of transitional thing for me.
Yeah. And some of the things I read about, because you pretty much Million Dead ended, and then you almost, it seems like you seamlessly went into being a solo act. And one of the things I did to prepare for this interview is I went and listened to Nebraska. The Bruce Springsteen album, which is just such an incredible album. Such an incredible album.
Yeah.
And when you were switching to your solo career, did you have to like relearn playing guitar or songwriting to adapt to the new style you wanted to pursue?
Not in a kind of like catastrophic kind of way, should we say.
Sure.
Because the other theme through my musical experience growing up was that my older sister was banging stuff like the first Counting Crows record, a band called the Levellers, who are a British folk punk band from the early 90s, Soul Asylum, that kind of stuff. And like there was an acoustic guitar around, and I sort of learned how to play a lot of those songs for the benefit of me and my sister and my sister's friends, to sit around and sort of sing around kitchen tables or campfires when we were on kind of camping holidays and stuff. And I'd sort of always been doing that. And then as Million Dead went along, I kind of picked up an interest in, I just kind of like, we were in a kind of shouty hardcore band. We were touring with shouty hardcore bands and blah, blah, blah. I just needed to listen to something else. And there were a few kind of real signpost records for me. There was a Loose Records compilation that came out in about 2003 that was a big deal for me, that had some great songs on it. Nebraska, the Johnny Cash American Recording Series. But this is the other thing, is that like, because my route into music was quite topsy-turvy, like when I was, let's say, 21, I could have told you absolutely everything you could ever want to know about Sick of It All, and I'd never heard a Bob Dylan song. Do you know what I mean? It was this weird thing where I didn't do the basics in a way. And then, so it was in my mid-20s when we were touring with Million Dead, I started listening to Dylan and Springsteen and Cash and old country songs.
Yeah.
Actually, today in Rough Trade, I found that they've just reissued a record that was an enormous influence on that transition for me, which was Josh Rouse's Dressed Up Like Nebraska. I don't know if you know Josh Rouse, amazing singer.
No, I don't, but I'm going to buy that album.
Dressed Up Like Nebraska is a brilliant, brilliant record. So I kind of started listening to all this, and then Million Dead it fell apart, but we sort of agreed to fulfill our commitments and do a farewell tour. But that meant I had a sort of a bit of an overlap transition period to think about what do I do next. And I decided I wanted to try my hand at solo shows. I'd done like 2 of them already for charity stuff because I had this ability to do it from my childhood sitting around campfire thing.
Right.
And I really enjoyed it, and I thought I'd give it a try. It's a funny thing because nowadays, I'm about to sound mildly defensive, and forgive me for that. Nowadays, there's a much better trodden path for people from punk and hardcore bands making solo acoustic records.
Yeah, folk punk is like a thing now.
That was not a thing in 2005, and I'm not trying to claim like fatherhood rights or anything on this, do you know what I mean? Because like Chuck Reagan and Tim Barry were starting to do it then, and I think they take the credit, and indeed Jonah Matranga was around as well. But essentially, when I told everybody that I was going to make an acoustic record after being in Million Dead, I got laughed out of the room by everybody.
Right.
In fact, with the exception of Extra Mile Recordings, which is why they're still my label to this day. But I'm booking agents, managers, loads of people were just like, fuck off. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of I'm slightly defensive of that fact, because a lot of people, because things now are going much better for me than they ever did for Million Dead, a lot of people in retrospect, with the sort of telescoping of hindsight, sort of think that I took a decision to make more commercially viable music. And that specifically wasn't what happened. I took a decision that if I'd formed another hardcore band straight after leaving Million Dead, I would have got signed to a big label straight away. And I didn't do that. And I'm kind of proud that I didn't do that.
Oh, 100%. And I think you continuously, even through all of your records, have stayed true to yourself, because if you wanted to like make commercially viable music, you'd have gone EDM.
Yeah,
I think by this
totally.
point.
Well, it's a funny thing, and in this world that we live in, that like everybody's sort of conceptually in favor of artists being artists and following their ideas, and then when artists do that, they tend to get shouted at by about half the people in the room.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm old enough, and I've been doing this for long enough that I don't care about that anymore. I just do what I want to do, and I hope that in the fullness of time, people can look back over my catalogue and see that I took decisions for artistically integral reasons.
Absolutely, that's a great place to come to when with age. I'm in my early 30s now, and I'm starting to hit that point where I'm just like, I just want to do what interests me.
Right. I mean, one of the things for me is that so I've just put out my 8th record.
Yes.
Right? And then you reach a certain point after a certain amount of material, a certain amount of time on the road, a certain amount of time existing at a certain level of success, where you become kind of inarguable. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
totally.
and it's a really liberating feeling, and one that I wasn't expecting, because there's no manuals on what happens when you're on your 8th record, because so few people get to do it, and I feel very fortunate to be here. But you just sort of slightly reach a point where it's just kind of like, well, what is it that you've got to say to me, sir, about my decisions? You know, it's like I clearly I'm able to do this with some degree of success, so I'll follow my own nose.
Absolutely, and the new record is incredible.
Thank you.
I've really been enjoying it, and I thought that doing a companion podcast was a brilliant idea as well, because I don't know many other bands or musical artists that have podcast companion to their albums.
It seemed like an interesting idea. I should now throw in at this point that it gave me, among other things, a newfound respect for people who drive podcasts for a living, because like I've been on a million podcasts like we're doing now, and it's a very different thing being in this seat to the seat that you're currently in. Do you know what I mean? Like to be in charge of it or not in charge of it. And I sort of like, I'm sure you have this feeling as well. I really wish we could redo the first episode again, because by the time we've done 13, I felt like I kind of got my eye in a little bit, you know what I mean? And figured out how to drive it. And now I'm like, can we do the first one again? Because it'd be better now. But of course you can't, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I certainly it was a learning experience for me for sure.
Yeah. And I relate to that so much. Like I go, and especially like I go back and I feel like I've gotten better at better at asking questions and also and listening. Like I feel doing this has made me a much better listener.
Sure.
In my everyday life. Which is also good for my field of not just this, but also as being a comedian.
Right. Yeah. Sure. Absolutely.
I know we're just about out of time, but I want to say one other thing about this show you're doing now, which is a great concept because it's kind of like storytelling and a concert, isn't it?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a funny thing because so I had the idea of like, touring No Man's Land. I wanted to kind of play a solo set of just songs from that, and then it was like, well, if we're doing things differently, we've been playing like an in quotes punk show for such a long time, and it's not the only thing that me and the Sleeping Souls can do. So we thought, let's jettison, let's start again, let's try something different, and I sort of didn't really think about it. It was quite instinctive, should we say. Mm-hmm. And it was funny because it was only the day before the first show, which was in Montreal the other day, that I suddenly went, wait a minute, is this a terrible idea? Have I had a terrible idea? Have I completely screwed this up? Is everyone going to hate this? Oh my God, and sort of had a panic about it.
Sure.
But but it went well that night. And then it's really kind of like, night on night, it's kind of coalescing,
Totally.
And actually, it's funny because I think that I've now figured out how to present it, which is that it's a storytelling night all the way through. It's just that the first half is stories about other people, and the second half is stories about me.
Right, and it's the kind of like I loved VH1 Storytellers when that was on, and
totally.
The idea of talking to the crowd and hearing about the stories behind the songs, I always thought was such a great idea, and to hear that you're doing something like that
it is something
really
along those
cool.
lines. And there's a ghost of the Springsteen Broadway show in there as well. Although actually I should say, this is a controversial statement, also on Netflix is the Loudon Wainwright storytelling show, which I happen to think is better than the Springsteen one. And we were fortunate enough to have Loudon at the Lost Evenings Festival in Boston earlier this year, and the way that he presented his set that night was also quite a big inspiration for the set that we're doing at the moment, because it had that storytelling vibe to it, and there's a theme that ran through the set. It was like it wasn't even just like tell a story, play the song. It was like tell a story, play a song, and therefore play the next song, because that relates to the one that we just heard in the following ways.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So that there is actually a kind of a narrative arc to the whole show. And it was so engaging to see him. I mean, Loudon Wainwright's one of my heroes anyway. Yeah. And to meet him and hang out was an awesome thing. I mean, that guy's a legend. But yeah, so there's a lot of that kind of DNA floating around in the show.
That's fantastic. That's kind of how I feel right now, sitting here across from you, because I saw you open for the Dropkick Murphys in Connecticut years ago.
Wow!
And
Mohegan Sun.
Mohegan Sun, yes, the casino, yeah. And you just were. And like you brought someone on to play harmonica, keeping that like DIY kind of vibe. And it was, it's very surreal for me to be sitting across from someone whose art I enjoy so much and has meant so much to me.
That's very sweet of you to say.
So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, man.
Yeah. And if any time you want to talk to me for longer, just let me know.
Like next time we're playing a show anywhere that you can make, just email us again and we'll sort it out. I've really enjoyed this chat.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much, Frank.
Awesome.
That was such an unbelievable thrill to get to talk to Frank Turner. That was one of my favorite experiences that I've had doing this podcast. So, Frank, thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to me. And thank you to Frank's tour manager, Trey, for helping to make that happen. I really, really appreciate it. And Frank, thank you for turning me on to the Josh Rouse album, Dressed Up Like Nebraska. I'm really enjoying that as well. So thank you, Frank. That was recorded backstage at Town Hall here in New York City, and my fiance and I attended Frank's show there the same night that we recorded that interview, and it was an absolutely incredible show. If you can get tickets to see Frank Turner on his No Man's Land tour, go. It is an absolutely incredible evening. The songs are brilliant, and Frank is a incredible performer. And I was really glad I got to see that show. And I think having talked to Frank about his idea for the tour and for the stage show that he's touring right now, I think it kind of deeply gave me a deeper appreciation for the craft of not just writing songs, but also of putting together a concert. And it gave me I think a deeper connection to somebody whose music I already have a very deep connection to. So keeping with a similar theme, if we're discussing performance and storytelling was a part of my conversation with Frank, I wanted to take this chance for anyone who might have just been listening to me for the first time. I'm going to play you a clip from my one-man storytelling show, Fighting My Wiring. This is a show that I've been workshopping for the past couple years. I've performed it all over New York City, and there isn't any of it available online. I only send video. The story I'm about to play for you, I send to venues trying to book the show, and people who have seen me perform the show in New York City have heard this story. I'm working on a version of this story for the podcast Risk. Kevin and the entire team at Risk, I apologize for the delay in submitting my updated revisions. Life gets in the way sometimes, but I'm working on it. So I wanted to share this, guys, with you, and I hope you enjoy it. Here's a clip from my storytelling show, Fighting My Wiring. So I look like I play acoustic guitar on the quad at a college campus somewhere. That's an assumption you can make about me that's true. But what I don't look like is somebody who attracts the off-hours sexual interest of people who work in the sex industry. But I have. When I first moved to New York City, I moved in with an aspiring actress who was paying the bills by being an exotic dancer, as the kids say. And I found this out because she had a habit of leaving her sequined-encrusted thongs hanging to dry in our bathroom. And literally, sequined underwear is only meant to be shown in public, because the sequins are like a fishing lure for like drunk businessmen and their money. And she would order a lot of sequined thong underwear, and she would put them on, and then she would come to my door and say, "Does this look good? Do you think people would give me money if I wore this?" And I would say, yeah, I think they would. Because New York City is where you go to have your dreams come true. And I would call my friends in Baltimore and tell them about these things that were happening. They would say, "Dude, I think your roommate wants to fuck you." And they were right. But at the time I was like, well, that wouldn't be a good idea because we lived together. And then one night I was in bed asleep at 2 a.m. and I heard a knock on my door. And she came into my room wearing a long flowing dress, proceeded to climb on top of me and say, "I am taking what I want." And then I decided to start living in the moment. Because like all of my best sex stories, if I were a girl, would be the worst sex stories. But because it's me, we have a parade. So this would go on. This went on semi-regularly for a couple of months, and then eventually trickles off because we had to sleep sometime. But then even as it trickled off, I would hear her when she would talk to people on the phone. She would refer to me as like her fake husband or her someday common law husband, which was probably something to take of note. But because she would still walk around topless, I could not see the Les Miserables style red flag that was being waved in front of my face like it's NASCAR. I'm just too concerned of what's going on in the moment. But sometimes you need someone to shake you out of that moment. So, it's September of 2012. It's 7 a.m. I've been out doing shows really late at night, and I hear a knock on my door. I'm not expecting anyone at 7 a.m. before I have to wake up and go to work. So I ignore it. Is that 5 minutes, right? All right. So walk up, so a little bit longer, and then the knocking gets more intense.
I still ignore it. And then the knocking turns into a loud smashing sound. I open my bedroom door to a scene of my front door flying off of its hinges and 5 Brooklyn cops storming into my apartment. And of all the ways I've encountered police in my life, angry is my least favorite. Because I'm of the firm belief that if I annoy a cop much, he might go, oh, fuck it, I'll do the paperwork. And then he said the best line. He comes in and says, you didn't hear me knocking? Which is going to be his catchphrase in the sitcom I'll include. And I ask, well, what's going on? They say, we got a call about a mentally disturbed, possibly suicidal person. And they're like, oh, they've heard my band. And then they get my roommate's name, and then they take her, and they actually take her overnight to a mental hospital because she had posted insane-sounding Facebook rants, so set those to private when you have them. And then she called me from the mental hospital, and she said that I had something to do with it, and I was conspiring against her, and she was going to sue me if anything happened to her cats, because of course she has cats. But you shouldn't do that because they listen to those calls and your overnight stay will turn into a 3-night overnight stay. So I panicked and grabbed all of my belongings and hid in my friend's apartment because I didn't know if she was coming after me or not. And eventually I talked to her dad, and it got to the point where I thought that she wasn't going to scoop my eyeballs out with an ice cream scoop if I came back. So I had to go back and get the rest of my stuff after I found another apartment in Queens. And she was holding one of her cats while I was moving my stuff out, and she was talking to the cat and referring to it as the cat's daddy, which is unsettling because that cat didn't look anything like me. And I moved to Queens. She hasn't come after me since. And when I told this story to my current girlfriend, her reaction was to say, at least you got to sleep with a stripper, and then she just posted up. And then we high-fived. So it all worked out. Thank you.
Okay, folks, that's our show for this week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If this is your first time listening or if you've been here for a while, I really, really appreciate it. Thank you again to Frank and Trey. It really meant a lot to me to get to talk to Frank Turner on my show. And it was quite surreal and lovely all at once. And I really enjoyed the performance at Town Hall, Frank. Thank you again for such a great show. If this is your first time hearing of me and you want to check out more of my show, I have over 100 episodes. They are available wherever you get your podcasts. You can leave a review. You can add us to your fave playlist on Stitcher, leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. And I also want to give a shout out and let everybody know, give a shout out to my supporter at the awesome producer level, Mary Beth Mooney. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. If you guys want to check out my Patreon, one of the rewards I offer is I will make you a custom mix, any style of music for any life situation. You can check out patreon.com/awesomedisaster. And I'm on Twitter at ComicWillCarey. You can give me a follow over there, and I will keep you guys posted about upcoming live performances I'm doing and new episodes I'm posting. I've done, as I said, I've done over 100 of these, and I don't plan on stopping anytime soon because I really enjoy doing this. And this was this particular episode was a great thrill for me. So follow me on Twitter. Let me know what you guys think of the show. I'm on Facebook also. And thank you guys again for checking out my show, and I will see you next week between Awesome and Disaster. Take care, everybody.